Hey, welcome everybody. This is Dr. Stinky McDougall, and I'm going to give a rebuttal to the illegitimate scholar's invitation to a match-off over whether or not Flint Dibble's information, his podcast appearance, and the data that he provides is enough to, well, warrant an interview and a debate with illegitimate scholar. Now, here's the thing about this. I came across his post challenging someone to, defend Flint Dibble's information, his data, which he seems to think that he has done a marvelous job just, dissecting. And the fact of the matter is, I learned long ago that although the conclusions of many in academia are flawed, primarily because in order to get the degree, they have to agree to the errors made previously, their data is quite excellent. They have, in the case of Flint, identified 300,000 points of data, all of which support exactly what he wants to debate, which is that there is no evidence of Graham Hancock's advanced ancient civilizations.
This video analyzes Flint Dibble's main argument and his supporting evidence pertaining to the Ice Age. I will show you with scholarly archaeology papers that Flint Dibble did not disprove Graham Hancock's lost civilization hypothesis.
None. And while I'm willing to utilize that data that Flint provides in order to support that thesis,
I'm here to present what I see are two clear disproofs of a lost advanced Ice Age civilization.
All right, food and Ice Age. We're just going to talk about the Ice Age in this video.
I really want to focus on Ice Age coastlines, evidence from Ice Age coastlines and excavations, underwater evidence from the Ice Age.
Ice Age coastlines.
The thing is, at this point, we have something like 3 million shipwrecks from around the world.
3 million shipwrecks, huh?
And so one of my questions for Graham is, if this is a global civilization with ships, why is it that we don't have shipwrecks from this global civilization? I see this as a big, big problem. If we're looking for a civilization that's traversing the oceans, we should find these shipwrecks.
So if there is a civilization traversing the oceans, we should find those shipwrecks.
And similarly, these shipwrecks are located near the coast. They're located on the submerged continental shelves. We are actually exploring these submerged continental shelves in detail.
what he didn't like and what he has become quite irrational about is whether or not we can expand the conversation to talk about other reasons why Flint's supposition that there was no previous advanced civilization is actually true. What his real problem seems to be is that he doesn't want someone to come on and prove that Graham Hancock is wrong. I mean, look, he did an interview of Graham, and he's quite proud of that interview. But he starts the interview with basically saying, hey, Graham, let's start out by talking about how all the other archaeologists are wrong and you're right. And that's just it's just not a good place to start from. In fact, my starting point with Flint was I solved the Temple of Delphi utilizing all of Flint's data. The only thing I didn't accept of Flint's is his conclusion that the young ladies are doing nothing but getting high or drunk and spouting off whatever comes to their mind. Quite the opposite. They're doing an excellent job, or were doing an excellent job, at prophecy. And there was a reason why they were doing that. And utilizing the data that Flint provided, I showed why there was an electrical reason, an electromagnetic explanation for why the Temple at Delphi existed. That is called taking the data and rather than dismissing it, enhancing it. My work is as a catastrophist, but more importantly, it is as an electric universe catastrophist. My work is based on the idea of the discovery of a crater, which is the origin of an apocalypse, the crater that worked opposite of this one, which is on Venus, which is the other side of the apocalypse. And from there, I expanded across the globe in a description of a global electric circuit. Part of that global electric circuit included explaining the expansion of the Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the creation of the Atlantic Ocean. I explained why we have a break down the middle of the Red Sea. Moses didn't part the Red Sea the short way, folks. Moses, at that point in the story, is an electrical discharge that parted the Red Sea the long way and ionized Venus in a single discharge. All of these ideas and all of these things are part of the reason why we can say that there was no ice age. But Illegitimate Scholar doesn't want to talk about there not being an ice age. He doesn't want to talk about this event being only 6,000 years ago. He doesn't want to talk about how wrong many of his suppositions are. He only wants someone to defend what he thinks are the inaccurate and incorrect suppositions of Flint Dibble. And that's just, it's insane. And so, he's laid out in his Twitter post here, thread, one straw man after another straw man after another straw man. And in particular, he wants to shoehorn this thing into the idea that the only thing that matters is that Flint was wrong. Yeah, Flint's not wrong. There are 300,000 points of data. And in many of the points that he makes about Flint's data, he even points to the GPS coordinates of a wreck. Do you know why they put the GPS coordinates in there? Because the wreck doesn't move.
Flint was still talking about homeostasis. So the idea is that if a ship is in homeostasis, if it's stable, it will survive essentially indefinitely. Flint says 20 or 30,000 years. We saw some sources just now that showed us that waterlogged wood can still have issues. It does still have degradation of its structure, but there's a bigger issue with this. And a question that Joe asks Flint really reveals some key information.
Typically, when things are buried, they're very stable. Or when they're, sitting, it depends on where you are on the bottom of the ocean. But typically, it's very, very stable.
Now, what about the shifting of sediment at the bottom of the ocean when you're dealing with things like 10, 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago?
I was just talking with Jessica Cook-Hale out of Bradford about this. She's done some studies off the coast of Florida of sort of hurricanes that are coming in today because she's excavating Stone Age shell mounds there. And it turns out, actually, that the hurricanes coming in today really don't disturb them much at all.
Okay, so there's one from 1690. We're going to assume that this is real. Doesn't really change much that one of them has a site. And, this one has a site from 1709.
That's actually the point that Flint makes. Although he didn't make it specifically, it kind of stands to reason. And it stands to reason because although there are currents under the water, truthfully, most shipwrecks, which are in, more than 20 or 30 feet of water, are not moving that much from storms or from hurricanes. They become inundated by silt and dirt and sand, and they stay right in place. They don't go anywhere. And that's a fairly simple position for anybody to reasonably make. I grew up visiting Door County, Wisconsin. Had a cabin all the way up in the northern end of the peninsula. And in this little bay that I'll put here, there is a shipwreck, and this is called Garrett Bay, and there's a shipwreck in there. And that shipwreck had been there for, 100 years or 150 years before I got there. And guess what? It's still right there. Most shipwrecks, the vast majority of them, are exactly where we find them. And you know what we find when we find these shipwrecks? We find wood. That's it. We don't find advanced craft that power themselves across the water. We find masts, and we find rudders, and we find, everything you would expect to find by a civilization that is learning to traverse the waters and sail across the oceans. It's a pretty simple supposition. Can we prove that there was no advanced pre-apocalyptic world? Yeah, we can. And the reason is that there's no evidence for it. However, after the apocalypse, which shaped the entire surface of the planet, after the apocalypse, we find all sorts of structures around the world that seem to be placed not only in, exactly where they need to be in an electrical circuit to function, such as Gunung Padang, which I solved for Graham Hancock for Valentine's Day. Bastard never said thank you. You're welcome, Graham. I did the same thing, as I said, with the Temple at Delphi. The Sphinx, it's pretty easy that it's an arc reactor, a cold arc reactor. And whether I got 100% of the analysis of these sites correct or only 50%, I'm 50% closer to the analysis of what's going on at these sites than Graham Hancock, Flint Dibble, or Illegitimate Scholar. Why? Because my study, my work focuses on an electric universe process. And that electric universe process is very predictable. It's why I can say with confidence that the Indonesian archipelago was formed by an induction bulb that occurred in the apocalypse. It's why I can say that the coasts of Eastern Asia and Western North America were formed by electrical forces. It's why I can explain why there is not only a triangle in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but I can explain why the island of Rapa Nui is a triangle. If you have not watched my Rapa Nui series, I'm telling you, if you want to understand the advanced civilization that emerged after the apocalypse, that island is fascinating. And not only is it fascinating, but the work by Catherine Rutledge is superb because she makes one absolutely perfect observation. And that was that the people that she interviewed when she got there in like 1916, 1917, the indigenous population that she got there and met had no idea how the Moai operated, nor how they were created, which, you know, is actually a pretty good observation for how most of these megalithic sites went into disuse. The general population had no idea how they were created, how they operated, or, you know, who built them. The Aztecs even said this when the Spanish got there. We didn't build these pyramids. They were here when we got here. Now, Illegitimate Scholar can't explain why that would be, but I can. In fact, maybe I'll make that my next video. But the reason that the Illegitimate Scholar doesn't want to have a conversation with me is because he doesn't want his work dismantled. He just wants Flint Dibble's work explored. Not his, not Graham Hancock's, not anybody else's. That's a straw man. That's someone who is unable to engage in information that they don't understand. He even says it himself. I don't want to engage in the question of whether or not the oceans are less than 30,000 years old, or whether or not the Ice Age never occurred. Hey, look, if the argument to be made is whether or not Graham Hancock is right or wrong, which is the supposition he makes in the beginning of his video, I don't know what the fuck he wants to debate. But, Illegitimate Scholar, if you want to have an actual conversation about ancient history, about ancient maritime development, I'm going to show you something. You see this little thing right here? This is a Global Consciousness Project 2.0 random number generator. And I've done several podcast interviews where this thing has gone off. And whilst I have a sense of what it's doing, it is the next level of interview technology. Because when you say or do something that's of meaning, that is impactful, that seems, well, it seems to move the dial moves. I don't know what else to say. I've accepted your terms to discuss whether or not Flint's data disproves Graham Hancock. But to say that I can't say certain things, or that we can't engage in certain parts of the conversation, or that I can't have, my own my own understanding of this is just ludicrous. It's just obnoxious. I think that's probably the best way to put it. And so, yeah, it was obnoxious for me to say that you just want to piss in the wind. But yeah, go back and read your post, everybody. Read his post and his thread. What does it look like? He's pissing in the wind. There's no substance to anything that he says. And just to put a fine point on why we haven't had the debate so far. I engaged him first on Saturday. Look, man, I went to Wookiee Foot on Saturday night. I did a bunch of psychedelics. I partied my ass off. I might have done some other illegal things. I slept all day Sunday. And you know, Monday, I worked all day, and I was in at 5 a.m. I gave plasma at 6. I worked until 6 p.m. I'm not debating you on Tuesdays or Thursdays because that's my schedule. Wednesdays, I'm not home till 6:30 or 7. If you want to have a debate and you want to talk, I've given him some times and dates and places we can do this, where I will have had a chance to be rested, I have a chance to go through more of the information and make notes, and where I have an opportunity to give you, the viewers, what you deserve, which is a thoughtful response to the questions that he wants to present. I'm not here to prove that illegitimate scholar is illegitimate. I'm here to have a conversation about the data that I have discovered and about the inquiries into our history that I've made, and the data and analysis that I've come to realize says a lot more about our history than, frankly, Graham Hancock has come to. If you don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Stinky McDougal. You can like, you can share, and you can subscribe to my channel. And if you want, and you know somebody that would like to interview me, please tell them to recommend Dr. Stinky McDougal for an interview, because my work on the apocalypse is unrivaled in the industry. And my popularity is not a sign of how correct or incorrect I am. It's a sign of how difficult it is to get people to understand the reality of an electric universe and an apocalypse that was electrical in nature. I mean, Dan the debunker can't even identify an anode and a cathode. How would you expect him to identify the anode or the cathode of an apocalypse? Peace out, everyone.